Hey people, it's NIyas713. I'd like to thank Pro-Black Vote Free for telling me about the story. So this is from Daily Mail. Jamaica wants £7 billion compensation from UK for Britain's involvement in slave trade over hundreds of years. Jamaica is planning to ask the United Kingdom for compensation for the Atlantic slave trade in the former British colony, a senior government official said. The Caribbean island nation will file a petition that could seek billions of pounds in reparation, pending legal advice, according to Olivia Grange, Jamaica's Minister of Sports, Youth and Culture. She said the country hoped for reparatory justice in all forms to repair the damage that our ancestors experienced. The former British colonies of the Caribbean were all involved in the slave trade, but it is Jamaica alone that will be asking for compensation. It comes a decade after the Caribbean Community, a regional organization, set out to ask reparations from Britain, France, and Netherlands in 2013. It was noted at the time that Britain paid £20 million to British planters in the Caribbean, the equivalent of £200 billion now in reparation during emancipation in 1834. No compensation has ever been paid to the descendants of the victims of slavery. Well, I want to remind you people, I once posted about this, I think a couple of years ago. I posted a £2 coin which commemorated the end of the slave trade, but I said what they didn't tell you is that the debt was so huge that they didn't pay it off until, I think, 2015, 2016. So I want you to raise that with people. The debt from the 1830s to pay off the slave owners was so huge, it wasn't paid off until 6 years ago. It was not hundreds of years ago like they try and dismissively say. Let's keep going. Jamaica was a center of the slave trade. No compensation has ever been paid to the descendants of the victims of slavery. Jamaica was the center of the slave trade, with the Spanish and the British forcibly transporting Africans to work on plantations of sugarcane, bananas, and other crops that created fortunes for many of their owners. Britain was not the only European nation to take part in the transatlantic slave trade, with the Portuguese, Spanish, French, Dutch, and the Danish all involved. An estimated 600,000 Africans were shipped to toil in Jamaica, according to the National Library of Jamaica. Ms. Grange added our African ancestors were forcibly removed from their homes and suffered unparalleled atrocities in Africa to carry out forced labor to the benefit of the British Empire, she said, adding redress is well overdue. Seized from Spain by the British in 1655, Jamaica was a British colony until it became independent in 1962. It's not clear whether Jamaica also intends to seek reparations from Spain. I think they should. Spain deserves it. They're still a very racist and evil nation to this day. The island was discovered as part of an expedition led by Italian explorer Christopher Columbus in 1492 and brought under Spanish control. Other West Indies islands were then used as outposts by English pirates and privateers involved in raiding Spanish treasure fleets. Some 200 years later, in 1655, Jamaica was seized by the British and would go on to become integral in Britain's supply of sugar, a sought-after commodity in the 18th century. The Caribbean countries of Jamaica, Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, and Barbados, which were under British control, connected Britain to Western Africa and the Americas and formed a key part of the triangular slave trade between the countries and Britain. They grew in population from a few thousand in the mid-17th century to 18,000 in the 1680s, with slaves making up more than half of the total. The West Indian country of almost 3 million people is part of the Commonwealth, and the British monarch remains head of state. That's another thing. I remember reading that apparently one of the reasons why the failure to sue Britain failed because of being part of the Commonwealth. All these black nations need to leave the Commonwealth and they need to become republics. And because one of the things is it has a legal precedence, because all Jamaica's legal problems, if they can't be resolved, ultimately gets referred to Britain to solve. And they also need to stop having their money printed in the UK. That's right, Jamaica's money is printed in the UK by a company called De La Rue. Let's keep going. Britain prohibited trade in slaves and its empire in 1807, but did not formally abolish the practice of slavery until 1834. And that's another thing that this impacted, because slave breeding plantations sprouted up in America, and those were real, because if they couldn't get them from somewhere, they didn't just say, well, we're just going to have to abolish slavery. They said, well, we'll get the female slaves and we'll make them produce that. That's another thing, basically mass rape of black women over and over and over to produce children like machines. To combat slave owners, the British government took out a £20 million loan, a very large sum at the time, and only finished off paying the ensuing interest payments in 2015. The reparations petition is based on a private motion by Jamaican lawmaker Mike Henry, who said it was worth some £7.6 billion, a sum he estimated is roughly equivalent in today's terms to what Britain paid to the slaveholders. Wait, didn't they just say that it was equivalent in the UK of £200 billion? But well, whatever. As long as they're at least starting with the reparations thing, but it really needs to be higher. Like 7 billion is just nothing. I mean, I know Jamaica is a poorer country and it'll go further, but they need to ask for more. It's a standard tactic in negotiation. You make a higher price. In fact, it was in the 48 Laws of Power. Act like a king to be treated like one. Oh, 7 billion. I mean, okay, let's keep going. I'm asking for the same amount of money to be paid to the slaves that was paid to the slave owner, said Henry, a member of the ruling Jamaica Labour Party. I'm doing this because I fought against this all my life, against chattel slavery, which has dehumanized human life. Grange herself declined to give a figure. The petition, which approved from Jamaica's National Council on Reparations, which will be filed pending advice from the Attorney General of Free Legal Teams, Grange said. The Attorney General will then send it to Queen Elizabeth, she added. The initiative follows growing acknowledgement in some quarters of the role played by slavery in generating wealth in Britain, with businesses and seats of learning pledging financial contributions in compensation. And I want to say this, huge corporations that exist today. Have you ever heard of Unilever? That was built off of the slave trade. I think, or at least involvement in the colonial exploitation of Nigeria. I'm not exactly sure if they were directly in slavery, but they were involved in colonial exploitation, definitely. They include insurance market Lloyd's of London, pub owner Green King, and the University of Glasgow. The petition also coincides with increasing efforts by some in Jamaica to sever formal ties with the United Kingdom. Opposition lawmaker Michael Phillips in December presented a motion to remove Queen Elizabeth as head of state. Go for it. More than 15 million people were shackled into the transatlantic slave trade, according to the United Nations. The transatlantic slave trade was a triangular route from Europe to North America, to Europe to Africa, to the Americas, and back to Europe. Firstly, merchants exported goods to Africa in return for enslaved Africans, gold, ivory, and spices. The ship then headed across to the American colonies, where the slaves were sold for sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other produce. Once in the colonies, the slaves worked on plantations inside the homes of Europeans as cleaners, cooks, or other household domestics. The products were then brought back to Europe, benefiting British citizens and producing profit for businesses back in Britain. Slaves were victim to an oppressive regime that exploited labor to make profit for wealthy landowners. They were brought and sold as property and often lived under horrendous conditions. In 1672, the Royal Africa Company was formed and held a monopoly on the British slave trade. Jamaica became one of the busiest markets, and African slaves soon outnumbered Europeans 5 to 1. The gold it supplied to the Royal Mint was named the Guinea, after the West African country from which the gold was taken. Let's keep going. Okay, keep going. Well, I'll just leave the rest in the article in the description. You can read this. Anyway, I'm going to leave this article in the description. If you'd like to support this channel, you might go follow me. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I'll leave it there as well. If you want to follow me, if you want to buy one of my t-shirts, I'll leave that there as well. Peace.